Hi everyone, my name is Sam Jenkins and I am a religious studies major at Middle Tennessee State University. This last semester, we learned about the material study of religion. The material study of religion looks at how people interact with objects and how objects, people, and other things all form a network of agents. This isn't secret agents, this just means that there's a whole network of actors going on. And all of this language I'm getting out of David Morgan's book, The Thing About Religion. He's going to be the theorist that I am working with as I do this analysis. Now, throughout this past semester, we've been looking at the history of Christianity through this material lens. And for this final assignment, I'm making this video to analyze how it works in children's literature. I'm going to be comparing these three books by a couple different aspects. And through this analysis, we're going to gain some insight on how the materials used and what effect it has on children's literature, specifically in a Christian children's literature context. What this analysis is not a conspiracy theory video. The point of this is not to figure out the hidden agenda going on within Christian children's literature. That's not what we're doing. What we are going to find out is we're going to gain some insight as to how the creators of these books use the theories and art and material aspects of what they're putting out, and we will be able to gain some insight on the motivations behind it. So the three aspects that we're going to go over for each of these books is a moat, the materiality, the organization and art of each book, and the actual text itself. The first book is The Animated Noah's Ark, released in 1945. I got to interact with it at the Special Collections office at MTSU very carefully because it was old, but it was still functioning really well, and it was very cool to interact with. The book is a hardcover, and the pages are held together with a style called comb binding. Out of all three, this book is extremely interactive, and I think that the way that a child or anyone would be immersed into the story itself is very special, because the other books you read and you look at the pictures, this one you're moving the characters around, you're interacting with it in a very special way. Moving on to the organization and the art, I was really intrigued by the decisions made by the artists. Most of the pages are monochromatic. There's only one color, and out of all 21 pages, 17 are found this way. Out of those 17, all of them are blue, except for one, and I couldn't figure out a rhyme or reason for why this page was red. It was very interesting to me. Within the organization and the art, each book has a sort of visual narrative going on. The very first page of The Animated Noah's Ark, it shows this huge farm with crops and livestock and a big property. The architecture is super Mediterranean looking. You feel like you're going to Santorini. And the trees are this Italian cypress. It's very interesting. Throughout the book, there's this tone of antiquity. It's like we're being transported back into this ancient time. What's interesting is it just looks Italian. It doesn't look necessarily super old. But there's also this molding of an ancient timeline and a modern context. So on page 2, inside of the dining room, we have a lifted table with lifted chairs. They're using plates and bowls and utensils and mugs with handles. I also thought it was cute that a cat was in the background. There could have totally been a cat. It just feels very modern with the relationships of the people in the room and the animals all being in this space together. As far as the people are depicted, we see a lot of gendered expression within this culture. So the clothing is separated, right? We have the men wearing the men clothing, and we have the women wearing the women's clothing. Throughout the book, we see the men doing manly things like chopping wood and all this stuff, and the women are also doing things as well, but they're doing it in a different sphere. There are some obvious things to point to as well, like the complexion. So in the first animated scene, we see Noah and his sons building the ark. Now, what's really interesting is they are very white people. Obviously, we don't know the complexion of Noah and his sons, but the idea is that we are in the Middle East and we are in an ancient context. So Noah, the white bearded man, using a modern handsaw, and his son is using this hatchet to shave and create this figurehead. What we're getting out of this is the artists are using a modern context to help the viewers get into the story. So overall, we see hairstyles and, the gendered separation of clothing and the tools being used, these are all 40s and 50s contemporary things that are pasted onto this story. The depiction of Noah is this super bearded, prophetic, important Bible character design. I thought it was really interesting that they're smiling, having a great time while they're making the ark. It's totally possible we don't know what they were feeling, but this is an apocalyptic moment. Doom is on its way, and I like to think that they whistle while they work, but that is definitely a choice that the artists made. What was interesting to me is the figurehead that was seen on the ark. We don't have any record of a figurehead on the ark, but this does feel like it's leaning towards this kind of Greek ship with a figurehead. All of this is being pushed into the feeling of you're in the past and you're seeing an ancient thing going on. Moving on to the text itself and the story that's provided, it's very simple and the language is very simple. The story makes very few references to evil, which we'll see that will come into play later on with the other stories. Instead, the emphasis is on Noah's family, which I love. They refer to them as the Noahs, or the Noah family, like it's their last name. Most of the story is their experience. It seems almost like a sitcom. There's little details about how the wives are feeling about their rooms, how they're taking care of the animals together. The wives are referenced in terms of the husband's first name. So it's like Shem's wife or Mrs. Shem and Mrs. Ham. We don't have a record of what the wives' names were. I do think it's kind of funny that they just made them their last name like their first names. And that is what I'm talking about. That's the kind of context that's brought into the story from this like 40s and 50s sitcom era. It's like they're making the Brady Bunch with Noah's family. One of the most interesting aspects of this first book is that there's no rainbow. So drawing off of David Morgan's language of agency, agency is the authority or power that an object has within its own network. So within the greater network of the children's literature sphere, or in a library, or anywhere it's a part of its own network. And these are some of the agencies we find. The external agency of an object comes from where did this object originate? So did it drop out of heaven? This book obviously was made in the 40s, but it references the Bible chapters. It's drawing upon this external godly authority. This moves into the inherent agency of the object. It has the value of the stories as they're being passed on. This book is special among the other books because it has an instrumental agency. It's actually an action that you can take that lets you be a part of the story, and the moving elements give it this special agency. Also give it a mimetic agency. Mimetic agency refers to how an object is pointing to another object by direct reference. Is it mimicking it? Being able to move the characters around, they are miming the actions of sawing, cutting, lions waking up. They're miming these things. There's an aesthetic agency at work. The monochromatic pages of the story are so interesting because it's when we turn to these alive animated moments. There's such a high vibrancy and detail and colors. The monochromatic pages set up an expectation that then is flipped once we get to the live pages. It's obviously a very wonderfully made and beautiful book, so it has this aesthetic agency as well. Okay, the second book. If you grew up in or around children's literature in the Christian realm, this might look familiar to you. Beginner's Bible. This is the toddler version, 1995. So all you 90s Christian babies, you'll know what I'm talking about. The first thing is the materiality. This is a soft cover book. The hard and soft covers of books are so interesting because there's this layer of protection that hard covers have, and there's this layer of fragility that soft covers have. I'm worried about, look, the corners coming up. I wouldn't expect toddlers to handle a soft book like this well. But that actually is referenced within, there's a note to parents and grandparents. The creators of the book are sharing their views on what constitutes a family unit. So according to the authors, this book actually belongs to parents and it's to be used by parents, and they're sharing the stories. So it's interesting because it's for toddlers, but it actually, within the beginning, it's really the parents that are doing the action. So this story is the shortest by far. It's 6 pages. There's only 3 lines per page. This is more a bullet point of the events of Noah's life than it is an in-depth story. As far as the organization and art, there is not much detail at all in these pages. The images are much simpler. The first book was just about Noah's Ark. The other two books have Noah's story within the collection of other stories. What's interesting about the other two books is Noah's Ark is very important within the entire book. Even though there's lots of other stories within the book, both books have Noah's story playing an important role. In the Beginner's Bible for Toddlers, which has stories from the Old Testament and the New Testament, the last picture from the Noah story is the image to represent the Old Testament stories. The visual narrative going on in the Beginner's Bible has some of the same elements. The very first image shows Noah reading a scroll, and scrolls are ancient. That's what ancient people read, except there's very clearly some English letters that he's reading, and of course they're from left to right because that's how we read. So I just think that's so funny that they put the scroll in there to make it feel old, and it doesn't even matter what the scroll says because it's not legible, but they still used English characters. They could have just as easily put in Hebrew characters or keep the whole thing as just squigglies, like most of it is anyway. This story in the Beginner's Bible is the only one that portrays God in any way throughout the story. And it's just these three holy lines coming down from heaven. Now for the visual narrative, the last aspect is the rainbow. This book does have a rainbow, but it's only 4 colors. Roy G. So that's interesting to me. I don't know if that's a budget thing. They have blue and purple and an indigo-like color within the story, so they could have put it in there. I don't know. Maybe it's a space thing. It's like, why did they choose that? Now, looking specifically at the people and how they're portrayed within the organization and art. Noah's family is referenced within the story, but they play a much smaller role. The sons and the sons' wives, they aren't depicted at all. And Noah's wife is depicted only in one of the pictures. There they are, looking at the nice rainbow. Of course, the complexion, again, was chosen to be fair. The interesting thing about this is, earlier in the little Bible, we have Adam being made by God's hand, and it is, of course, a fair complexion hand. Now, the thing is, you could say they made everyone in the story fair complexion. It's marketed to majority fair complexion English-speaking American people, but not all the characters within the story are designed that way. They specifically chose for the hand of God represented in the creation story to be a fair complexion matching Noah. And Noah is used to represent the Old Testament section. What is interesting in this book is that the clothing is not gendered. They're both just wearing long one-piece clothing with a belt and sandals. The animals are gendered by eyelashes. So there's that standard being kept up of ladies have long eyelashes and I guess men don't. Here we have the lions do seem to be separated by design other than just eyelashes, but all of the other animals, their genders are separated by eyelashes. The animal choice is also really interesting. We have, lots of exotic African animals. We also have a dog. It actually looks like Snoopy. And we have, of course, a house cat. So makers of the Noah stories really like their house cats. The text, the actual story itself, very simple, very short, very easy to read. There is mention of a good and bad element to the story, but the emphasis isn't on what's happening to the bad people. The emphasis is on Noah and what's going to happen after he gets out of the boat, which is he'll have a better world. The rainbow is a promise in this book. So they're stamping that little definition down. What is a rainbow? Well, it's God's promise to the world that he won't ever flood it again. This has very similar agencies to the other ones. Externally, inherently, instrumentally, we actually know what the creators were intending because they tell us in the note to the parents and the grandparents. And the reason they give? Because our characters and stories are fun and warm, they will endear themselves to your child's heart. So the purpose of the book is to endear the stories to your child's heart. So in conclusion, we have some of the same choices in this story that we see in all of them. It seems that the effort was to connect a fair complexion, English-speaking reader to Noah and to God. The last book we're going to look at, the Bible Story Series by Arthur S. Maxwell. This book was published in 1953, hardcover. As soon as you open up the book, we see the story of Noah in the binding. Now, there is a lot to say about this book. First, we're going to start with organization and art. Compared to the other stories we've looked at, this is huge. 23 pages, between 15 and 25 lines per page. There is a lot of detail. It does have this very classic 50s realistic art. We'll talk about this more when it comes to the mimetic agency of the object. There is this ornate big red letter in the beginning of the story. Now, the visual narrative is very unique among all three stories. It's very realistic, and it seems like most of the artistic choices are made to transport the reader back to this antique feeling. And it's not like there's one choice made in order to do this. Some of the characters have this sort of Mediterranean-looking long clothing, while others are in almost caveman style clothing. So similar to the other ones, where we just have this overall feeling of I'm back in time. But there are a few things that seem out of place in such an old story. Noah's using a sketchboard with pencils, mathematic compasses. It looks like a ruler. So he's using modern sketching devices in order to make his plans. Again, this is possible, but we just don't know for sure what people were using. And these do look contemporary to the 50s. The rainbow has 6 colors. This is interesting because the detail is so high in the rest of the book, but in this part, they just did 6 colors. I don't know if it wasn't in the budget to get that last shade of purple down. The way that people are depicted within the story is very interesting because sometimes they're depicted with fair skin, but at other times they're not. Now, the majority of the time, we do see this fair complexion. So, the text, what makes this story so unique among the other ones is the text. Very complex, with very complex language. The emphasis is on good versus evil, with a lot of time spent on the evil. The major emphasis is salvation, with the opposite being what happens to the bad people that don't listen to Noah. It has all these moments of Noah preaching that people should come on the boat with him. In the foreword, which was written by Maxwell himself, big emphasis that he puts on the Bible narrative has been carefully adhered to without any addition or fanciful speculations. So he is saying that he's just giving it to you straight. He's not making any alterations. That is not true. All over this story are additions, speculations, very fanciful. I'm telling you, the examples are all throughout the story. Every paragraph has one of these. When Noah's introduced, he speculates his job. Just what Noah's usual work was, we are not told. Perhaps, I'm going to stop you right there. As soon as you say the word perhaps, you're speculating. A lot to say about that. First, the agencies. Externally, yeah, they're claiming this is the Bible, and so it has that external value. Inherently, value of these stories is passed on just like the other ones. There's instrumental agency within this object, as told in the foreword. Maxwell writes that the stories need to be retold today so that the boys and girls of the 20th century may see their beauty and catch their inspiration. So we're told right there that the instrumental agency of this book is to connect specifically boys and girls of the 1900s. Not so much in the Noah story, but in the other stories we see contemporary haircuts, beauty standards, and of course, the fair complexion. Now, the mimicry. I mentioned earlier that there's this mimicry of Gothic lettering going on. I got the chance to hold this surviving page from a 15th century Book of Hours copy. This was amazing. It was actually on vellum, animal skin, and I just felt so geeked out to be able to come into contact with this. This is the kind of lettering we see in manuscripts. And we do have that same thing going on here, where the beginning letters of the sections have this enlarged red letter. So I would argue that this book is mimicking that and trying to gain some mimetic authority through that process. Final insights on this last book is that there is a lot of direct connection to the reader's worldview. For example, he references the evil of the people in Noah's day, and he asks the question, how could they become so evil if they're so near the beginning of the story and they're so near God? And he brings in this conversation of how little boys and girls can act up even right after Sunday church. I'm not trying to attack Maxwell. I do think it's interesting that this claim was made that it's just raw, translated for the 20th century boys and girls Bible, but it's not that at all. There's a lot of interpretation. This translates perfectly into application of all these concepts, how children are interacting with the Bible. Russell W. Dalton introduced this topic to me in the article, Engaging Childist Biblical Interpretations and Reading Studies to Enhance Children's Bible Lessons. The idea in this childism is that there's adultism, and adultism is when adults take everything we already know about everything we already know and try to just get kids to understand what we think, as opposed to what are children naturally getting out of these texts and visuals and experiences and Bible stories. There's two great works on this. One is by A. Roger and Gertrude Goebel. They wrote the book, The Bible, A Child's Playground. And they're just writing about how it's important for children to explore and interpret the text in their context. A study was done by Melody R. Briggs. In this study, 31 children from ages 11 to 14 read the Gospel of Luke, and they interact with their own interpretations. Both of these works are really great examples of how once children learn to read, they can read for themselves, and they have valuable inputs and interpretations of what they're reading. Dalton sums this up. He says that if adults take a back seat when they're educating, children are given richer opportunities to engage the biblical world through the lenses of their own lived experiences. So while, I'm thankful for people creating great books and explaining things to kids, it's also really important that kids get to make their own discoveries. So overall, what we've seen in all three of these books is a heavy concentration of worldviews being expressed through how the characters are made, how the worlds are designed within the artwork, whether children can risk getting into the book themselves, or whether it's made for adults to hold. I think the next phase of this would be exploring even more what it would look like to balance the idea of educating children, but also letting them educate us in something new that we've never seen before as adults. Well, that's all. Thank you so much for exploring this with me. I hope that your brain is tingling a little bit with some new ways of thinking, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Thank you.